I don't remember how old I was. It's when my wife was out to visit me, and that was about a week ago.
Scott died 23 days from this interview, but leading up to that moment, there's much to tell before this.
What are you most thankful for?
My wife and my children.
No more wife, you single now?
Yep.
You lonely?
Yeah.
Scott's life was full of up and downs, moments that you can point the finger at Scott, and then others where people turned their back on him when he was in a dark place in his own personal life. Scott never seemed to have everything at once, being sober, having the wife, having love, fatherhood. The pieces could just never seem to work together for Scott. He had to deal with his sickness, like a shadow walking behind him. Just 1 decade in Scott's life is what some musicians could only dream of. But Scott had a hard life of touring, keeping a career. He's a lost rock star with a huge library of art. Many thought that Scott was one of the ones that made it out of old habits. We could see him starting a new future. The fans wanted, and Scott wanted himself. Even though Scott wasn't the lead singer of the Stone Temple Pilots or Velvet Revolver at the end, he was still known and could draw a crowd. At the end of Scott's life, he was a touring musician. He would find himself in a full circle of life, starting over from playing the biggest shows a band could play to back in little hole-in-the-wall clubs, trying to make it with new music. When you check in with Scott at different parts of his life, you find different books that read the same but look entirely different. In 2011, Scott had an interview on the Howard Stern Show to promote his new book, talking about the dwellings of his life, the ups and downs. The interview was more concerning than anything when it aired. Scott was broken, and in a moment of struggle, it sounded. Even though Scott was back with Stone Temple Pilots at that time for the second time, playing shows almost every night and touring non-stop, it seemed to the common person everything was amazing for Scott. But when Scott sat down on Howard's couch to talk about it, Scott had a different side of it than many thought, and shocked fans. Scott made it known in so many words that he wasn't happy, and that he was almost miserable being on tour. The interview with Howard sounded more like an intervention. It was the first big real signs that something bad was coming in the near future for Scott. It was made known in that interview that Scott still had a problem with drinking, even though he was supposed to be sober in that moment. Scott's history in music could take many different stories to break down, but in 2003, with Scott having many years in problems and being wrapped up in a new arrest that went public more than it should have for Scott. The problem with it is that Scott had drugs on him. He was also having problems with Stone Temple Pilots that came to a head late that year. STP, with their 5th album, Family Values, broke up. It was a devastating blow for fans for an iconic band out of the 90s to lose them as well. Scott was out of a job for a small moment, but what Scott didn't even know is that he was about to walk right back into the spotlight. Scott himself even was quoted saying, "The days of Velvet Revolver were some of the wildest times he's ever had." The time that Scott spent with Velvet Revolver are hard to put in a small time frame. All of the members of the band said that it was a time of ups and downs. Scott was in moments of sobriety while in Revolver, and others, maybe not so much. It was the first time in a long time where he was in a band that he found a mainstream success since his departure from Stone Temple Pilots. Many may not know, but Velvet Revolver was a huge band. The band found major success in a very small amount of time, with people that fell in love with their unusual sound and look. Not to mention that everyone in the band was already famous and was from other big well-known bands. It's safe to say that Velvet Revolver took a chunk of Scott with it when it ended. As the band fell into years of having to tour, write new music, and start to deal with each other's personal issues, Scott found himself in old habits, old problems, old tensions with people, and many personal ego-driven elements unfolded in the group, and the recipe that was Velvet Revolver just became too strong of a mixture to contain itself any longer. By 2007, it was whispered that the band was on a road of hills, that they couldn't make it over together, and by early of 2008, the band was done. Scott, once again, was jobless. Scott now had essentially spent 2 decades in 2 very successful, well-known bands, seen much of the music industry, and doing what many musicians have never done, hitting the lottery ticket with the wild success of being in 2 successful rock bands as the lead singer. In 2008, the Stone Temple Pilots reunited, setting off on a huge tour, playing almost 80 shows around the world. The shows did so well, with tickets and the tour going well, that they decided to keep it going. Everyone was seeming to get along and have their jobs back. Scott was looking better than ever in the beginning, but as the band continued to push as a full-time touring act and writing new music, Scott was starting to suffer and slipping comments into interviews. The band was touring more than Scott wanted, and he let this be known on the Howard Stern Show in 2011. This is right in the middle of Stone Temple Pilots' life back for the second time, Scott being the lead singer. It was obvious and made known by Scott in this interview that there were problems, and Scott was unhappy. To no one's surprise, the end was near. Scott around the same time was busier than ever, trying to promote his book that he had written, and working on a solo album as well. This obviously did not sit well with the members of Stone Temple Pilots, and more than not, Scott giving moody interviews and sharing a little too much of what was going on in the band. In February of 2013, it was announced that Scott was fired from Stone Temple Pilots once again. After this, Scott is on his own, Velvet Revolver was gone, and now Stone Temple Pilots was gone. Needless to say, Scott had a reputation at this point for having problems as the lead singer in bands. Mood swings, drinking, drugs. It's a sad situation that Scott just couldn't get away from. It almost seems that what was coming was unavoidable. When you look into Scott's life, you almost see this tortured person, someone with such an amazing talent, such an amazing voice and ability to grab a crowd. If anyone was ever made to be a lead singer of a rock band, it was definitely Scott. But when Scott was off the stage, there was a huge part of him that just wanted to be a dad, that wanted to be a husband, wanted to be a normal person, be at home, sitting on the couch with his family. But Scott's career of touring and being away from home, he made it be known it was his least favorite part of his job. From this point on, Scott is really just on his own. Stone Temple Pilots was still playing from here to there, even hiring Chester from Linkin Park for a small amount of time to play some shows. Scott knew about it. He was hurt. Scott was haunted about his past. Every interview he did from that day forward, he was always asked about his time with Velvet Revolver and Stone Temple Pilots. Would they ever get back together? It's not what he wanted to talk about. It's not what he wanted to hear. Scott had entered rehab at times from his departure from Stone Temple Pilots, and his personal life was met with whispers of on and off again substance abuse. Moments of looking great, like things were going well, and others like they were going down. But Scott did what he always did. He pressed forward and played music. He was playing solo shows and working on new music and touring. From the time Scott was giving interviews from 2008 to 2015, his last year, you can see Scott looking rough every year as time was working against him. But time and substance had taken any youth that was left from him. In 2015, Scott's wife said that he was drinking more and more than he should have. She confronted him about it. Scott simply said, "I'll get it together." Scott's wife would even go on tour with him for about a week in November, trying to keep him straight. Scott was able to sing every night, play the whole show, encores, and do what he always did. But soon enough, Scott was alone on tour and left to his own devices of old habits. On December 1st, Scott gives his last interview. In the interview, Scott's pale, he looks rough, his voice is somewhat cracking, almost seeming that he's having trouble completing sentences. He gives no hints that he feels down or sick. That same day, later that night, Scott plays his last show with his band in Toronto. It was just a regular show with no signs of Scott in trouble. After the show that night, Scott and a few friends go to a local bar and just have casual drinks. The next morning, December 2nd, Scott's last day alive, he wakes up at 9 a.m. He's in Minnesota, in his bus. Scott was just hanging around for most of the day, and that night he would go out to a restaurant with a friend. And this is where the last picture of Scott was ever taken, hours before his death. Scott heads back to his bus, where he talks to his bandmates for a little while, and then soon heads to his bedroom in his bus. He sent his wife a text message saying, "I'm so in love with you, my beautiful wife." She didn't see it until that morning. Scott is now alone in his room, never to make contact with anyone else again. That morning, around 7 a.m., Scott's wife calls him, but no one answers. A little after that, crew members and bandmates are waking up, some from the hotel and some from the bus. They knock on Scott's door and ask him, does he want to go to the Mall of America to go Christmas shopping with them? But no one answered the door. It wasn't uncommon for Scott to sleep late, so they left him alone. Everyone left the bus. Scott's wife starts to call and text him, with no response from him. But sadly, what she didn't know, nor anyone with him, Scott was lying in his bed, dead. He died sometime in the night. Scott laid in the tour bus, in his room, on his bed, for most of the day, with no one really noticing where he was. It was a day off for the band and the crew members, so everyone just did their own thing, not bugging one another. But around 7 p.m. that night, Scott's wife is now panicked. She's not heard from Scott all day. It's not like him. She calls the tour manager and says, "Have you seen Scott? I haven't talked to him." The manager says, "No problem. I'll go get him and tell him to call you." The tour manager heads to Scott's bus, goes in, and starts knocking on Scott's door with no answer. Soon, he takes his key and opens the door. He sees Scott on his bed. Scott's hands are around his head, in the fetal position on his left side. He was cold. His eyes were halfway open. The tour manager started to shake Scott, but he said he was so stiff he couldn't really move him. He had been there for almost a full day. The manager calls a bandmate from the hotel. He runs out of it to the bus and runs to Scott, checking for a pulse. They soon call 911, and then the tour manager calls Scott's wife to tell her what's going on. He tells her, "Honey, he's gone. He's not coming back." Scott's wife, Jamie, shouts through the phone. She's in Los Angeles, on the other side of the country, away from her husband, who she's deeply in love with. Police are now involved, and the bus becomes an investigation. They find cocaine in Scott's room and under another bunk in the bus. Police go through the whole bus, and now it's a crime scene because of drugs being found. They look through everything in the bus, every drawer, every seat, every piece of clothing and bag, and soon bring in drug dogs. Soon they take Scott's body out, and the news knows that Scott has died. When Scott's labs come back sometime later, they find a mixture of drugs in him with alcohol. The ups and downs of drugs and drinking have finally found Scott in a moment of frail and weakness. Scott never even made it to his 50s. It's an unbelievable loss of life. Not only a father, but a husband, and an artist, and a human that should have had more time on Earth. Scott's death was marked on December 3rd, 2015. He was only 48 years old. Scott's name will be carried through history when it comes to music. He can't be replaced, and for such a short time on Earth, he made a huge impact. Long live the memory of Scott.